各位朋友，各位老
Dear
师，
friends, dear participants, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the ninth South-South Forum on Sustainability. I'm today's moderator, Xiaohui. We're very honored to have Mr. Lu Qiyuan with us today for this session. This is the fifth session of our current forum. Mr. Lu is a renowned commentator on finance and economics, and he's also a board member and general manager of a group under the Ministry of Finance. He also serves managerial and consulting roles in many renowned enterprises. He is also our special consultant of Green Ground Eco Tech Center. He is seconded by the Ministry of Finance to Hong Kong, and he's been researching the financial problem for more than 3 decades, and many of his findings became policies later. The most famous of them is the theory of fiscal finance. These years, he has been teaching courses on Sina Weibo with 1.4 million followers, and he's always a top-notch account. His is always a top-notch account on Weibo in terms of finance and economics. In the first half of last year, we had tried to launch some of his video programs on Bilibili, which were well received, but we had to stop due to censorship. Many of our friends want to continue to learn from him, yet they cannot find a way. And recently, we've invited him to make his theory into a video course. We've already begun recording, and it is our hope that later this year we can find a suitable platform where we can launch this. I'm looking forward to this. Of course, there is always some controversy online regarding Mr. Lu. We always accept criticism with good faith, but we do not participate in debates. And I hope you can understand this, because our energy should be used to fight the real enemy and not in fighting within ourselves. Everyone's busy after all. And recently we've seen people say that they have rich sponsors sponsoring the global university. They have to make it clear that our operation was solely based on the donation from its founders, especially Dr. Lau Qinji, who always subsidized with her own income. So we're a network for academic exchange independent from any education institution, enterprise, or agency. We hold this forum where we charge a little bit of registration fee. This income cannot even cut the language work, the expense on language work, let alone the rest. And our language professionals are work on a quasi-voluntary basis, which will last about 1 month with 32 sessions. It's hard work. Hope they can have your understanding and support. As for Green Ground Eco Tech Center, it is a social enterprise launched by Professor Wen Jieju. He donates all the income from this enterprise to support the lofty cause of rural construction, or for other sorts of philanthropy. Well, we're lucky that we have some very good volunteers and friends with a similar mind, which help us with translation, editing, and publication, and other sorts of work. Thank you all on behalf of this. I take this opportunity to talk a little bit more about our forum. And now let's welcome Mr. Lu to begin his session tonight. He will talk about for 1 hour and and 15 minutes to 1.5 hours. Then they'll have the rest of the time for Q&A. He will be the sole speaker tonight, and if you have any question, please prepare in advance in WeChat groups following our pre-established format so that we can post them later. And today, the topic is the end of neo-colonialism and the dawn of a new era. Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize to you all because I'm not too technical savvy and had a little problem with my cell phone. But it's lucky enough that I can begin this exchange of today now. And I would like to congratulate on this 9th South-South Forum. It takes a lot of work to carry on. It's an important platform to discuss about the development of developing countries, and it's also a rare one. And Global University and Green Ground Ecotech also both contributed a lot to this cause. All my respects go to this. Today, the topic is the end of neo-colonialism and the dawn of a new era. Why we're again talking about colonialism? Because China is facing a very important conjuncture that is unprecedented. There are different interpretations of this special time. It means that the 500-year-long history of colonialism will come to an end. In my opinion, by 2049, when PRC celebrates its 100-year anniversary, we may be able to claim that the 500-year history of colonialism has ended. When we talk about colonialism, I have a first-hand experience myself. I came to Hong Kong in 1995. Hong Kong features characteristics of current colonialism and modern colonialism. I will talk about the different stages of colonialism and why neo-colonialism has to end, how it will end, and why it is ending on our hands, and how we'd like to welcome the new era. And actually, at this very moment, we can see the dawn of a new era. Well, today my speech will be roughly divided into 4 parts. In the first part, I will talk about the 500 years of colonial history, which will be falls into 3 stages. The first stage is classic colonialism. Well, actually, the very first 2 stages have been discussed by Marx. And the third era is actually the issue with in Edward Said's Orientalism, the post-colonialist issue. And when I prepared for this, Professor Lau Kenqi suggested that we may not want to use this post-colonialism term because post may seem to indicate that it is over. It may cause misunderstanding because colonialism is not over yet, so I decided to use the word neo-colonialism instead. The different stages will be defined as the follows. Classic colonialism is the beginning, which began from the Netherlands and Spain. And it can be say that this total era is longer than 500 years. And the classic colonialism featured genocide as its biggest specialty. And also for the British people, the Spanish people in North America and in Africa, what they had done featured genocide. In this era, they only wanted land and means of productivity, and they do not want the indigenous residents. They kill them all. And as for modern colonialism, I would like to define it with Governor General rule. Generally, it is realized through the appointment of a Governor General. The colony, on the other hand, is no longer part of the metropolis, but it's still part of the country as territory, but it's still part of the country through this Governor General Bay. In this era, they just occupy the land, throw over the king, and they want the residents as labor. As for neo-colonialism, without genocide or overthrowing the local rulers, they try to achieve their end through the control of capital. As for this era, according to Edward Said, this may begin in 1945 and it lasts to this day. And the neo-colonialism can fall into roughly two parts. The first part is 1945 to the end of the Cold War, and then the rest begins as the Cold War ends. Recently, we've seen a lot of things going on. It's quite an eventful time. We've seen assassinations, wars, and if we only look at this through a international diplomatic lens, we would have many limitations. But if we want to understand this through the different stages of colonialism, especially try to understand this in the lens of neo-colonialism, it may be way more lucid. And to make it clear, I would like to talk a little bit more on theories. At the end of 1847, Marx and Engels drafted the Manifesto of Communism. He said that in each era of economic production and the social structure that came with it, all these are the historical foundation of the economy and politics of that era. What he wanted to say is that productivity determines the production relation, and that the fundamentals of economics determines the superstructure. As we all say that all human history is a history of class struggle. What does this mean? This Russian-Ukrainian war, is it a war between different nations? As well, Shinzo Abe or Kuroda Haruhiko, what they did, are they struggling for their nation? These are actually a very classic class struggle under the neo-colonialist era. But currently, generally researchers or scholars would try to use a different narrative to talk about the current problems, which would hide the brutal exploitation and oppression under neo-colonialism. Although it's exploitation between of one nation of another or one race of another, but it's still class exploitation. It's part of class struggle. Marx has key observations over this. As Chairman Mao, he has also good observations over this. When we talk about this 500 hours of colonialism, in the word, we can say that in essence, they are a history of class struggle. This is of importance to China's final decolonization and anti-colonialist struggle. You do not want to think that I, as a researcher of finance and economics, and what I did are just something in terms of legislation on tax or research in economics. It's actually part of this anti-colonialist struggle. When we come to the basics of economics, it'll be easier to understand things. Many of our dear friends, sometimes, occasionally, their perception limited to international relationship or some kind of ideology, like all kinds of isms or religions. If this happens, they will fall within the logical trap of neocolonialism. The clashes between civilizations. In this work, class struggle are summarized as clashes of civilization, and this would bring about a series of problems. And today, I would like to talk about the different stages of colonialism. As for classic colonialism, it is when the developed, advanced, industrialized countries, by using force, especially firearms, to engage in genocide of country or tribes or races through their advanced technologies. As for the modern colonialism, there is already mechanization. There are already machines where mass transport was possible. And modern colonization came into being. It's not just limited to agricultural tribes. The victims are not limited to this. They may also touch upon some of the relatively underdeveloped nations or tribes or races that are on their way to industrialization. And they have their own special features in terms of productivity. For example, China used to be a semi-colony when a Western countries that invaded China, and also that Sino-Japanese War during the end of the 19th century. By that time, China already had its navy vessels, China already had its trains, its locomotives. But China still failed. China was still beaten and became a semi-colony. It means that the emperor was still there. The government was still there. The prime minister, then the Hongzhang, was still there. They did not sign a governor general instead. Now, the very typical colonies are Hong Kong and Taiwan. Hong Kong is a very good example of it. There used to be a governor general, and systemically and culturally, there were also colonial characteristics, and they have to look at it very carefully. Well, for this anniversary of the 25th year that marks the return of China, I wrote something about the current history, the more contemporary history of Hong Kong, and in the end, I decided to give up because it's too difficult. Because the contemporary history is not history.
Because the modern history is not really a history, because the relatives of the people who experience the history are still alive. So when you already have a resolution of what happened, it almost is like a judgment to those people who is relative. So I'm aware that I don't have this role or the ability to judge. But once this book is published, the past glory, it might be collapsed. What we have understand might have a new meaning. So what we understand about the modern colonization and the neo-colonization actually is not that easy. How do we understand the neo-colonization? There are lots of hurting points, because this is the colonization of capital, and it's no longer just a pure colonization on agricultural or industrial colonization. The neo-colonization includes the old empire, the colonization of old empire on the former empires. For example, Germany and France started a colonization on Slavic nations. For example, Russia. Russia actually is also an old empire, but they also experienced a new colonization. I called this Russian-Ukrainian war as a Slavic national war, because some people, they would like to read this war like they would like to define or to justify the war. So what my response is, when you are discussing the major issue, first of all, you need to have a height of the philosophy, and second of all, you need to have a depth of the history. So on the level of philosophy, you need to have a view that you can see both sides. I have mentioned the whole human history is the history of the the war, the conflicts between classes. So the Russian, Russia actually challenged the empire who is invading the interest of a whole Slavic nation. So for me, I would define this war as a Slavic national liberation war. I believe lots of people are not agreeing on my points, but we can discuss on this. We can discuss further on this. And the second, another major issue nowadays is the murder of Abe. We know. So Abe is anti-Sino, it's against China. But how do we judge? How do we understand Abe's economics from the point of view of Japan? How do we judge his 8 years in power? He wanted to regain the sovereignty because Japan has lost his political sovereignty. Without political sovereignty, is there a complete economic sovereignty? No. So I would like to extend on this point. When we're talking about class, I am not talk. I don't want to use the terms of Marxism because for me it's a more complicated issue. So on the first level, it's called the Sadom, the slave. The second level is the labor slave. Third, the peasants. Fourth level is the rich farmer, rich peasant, and the fifth is the landowners, landlords. So today there is only one big landlord, which is America, and there are lots of rich peasants. For example, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, all of these are rich peasants, but they are not landlords. There's one country. It has succeeded in changing, evolving from from slave to peasants, and now is on the process of becoming a rich farmer, a rich peasant from a self-reliant peasants, and it even armed himself with armors. So I'm talking about China, which is causing the upset of Japan, of America. So, and who is the slave farmer? For example, Taiwan, Japan. You don't to rent the land of the landlords are not very, is not something that is very enjoyable. The father of Abe is it's the then prime minister's the top three in the government, which means he was in the 1985 the Plaza Accord. So he experienced the second defeat of Japan, which I call it as the Heisei default, because in 1985, Japan experienced another looting of America. After 30 years, is still in the trend. Abe was born in the 40s. So when he was 30 years old, he was born in the 50s. So at the age of the 30s, he experienced the defeat of the Plaza Accord, the defeat of Japan. The whole family of Abe was proud to be Japanese, but they don't have another choice but to fight against. But when Abe was just out in the politics, he didn't know much about politics. So once he gained the power, he went to China for visit, and then he was overthrown in the government. So when his second time elected as the prime minister, once he was mature, his economics was about not letting Japan to be the cow of the America, because when American is in deficit, it is keep giving money, getting money from Japan. In this way, Japan started to fight against Americans, the crop, the harvesting. If you don't understand the Japanese economics, there could be two reasons. One, in philosophy, we don't have the height to get out of the mist of all the concepts. And the second reason could be might not have the depth of the history. They didn't see enough of the history. And this is the first part. And now I would like to go into the second part. It's about the struggle against neo-colonialism. On different levels, there are different expressions. So we have the old way of expression, such as from Russia. Because we know the neo-colonialism is under the capital coercion. In order to fight against the US dollar, is the way the fight against the US dollar is the fight against neo-colonialism. So once again, let's go to the theory first. And so here I would like to talk about the modernity and advancement. So I was a college student in the 80s. At that time, the textbook was like in the style of the USSR, but we started to study the West, because under the first term is modernity. Modernity is both a philosophical term and also a material term. At that time, we learned from lots of philosophers, professors from like philosophy and even literature. We were talking about modernity all the time. And the next part, I would like to talk about advancement. Why would have to think about modernity and advancement? Because these two are logics of neo-colonialism. Maybe this might sound harsh to some people. Let's put it this way. I'm not saying that being modern is wrong or modernity is wrong. But what you know about modernity, all the expressions of modernity are all neo-colonialism's institutional expression. So whether it is good or wrong, yes, it is good to certain countries, but to countries who are in some spatial historical process, then it won't be that good. So when I say this is the fight against the neo-colonialism, you have to go back to the philosophical level. We have to stay alert of modernity. In politics, it showed as a political game, for example, in the elections. Actually, it's a vote, is a election under political control. I don't think this is the best choice for democracy. It might be a choice, but in some countries with a strong capital, the election is just a way for the capital to control the economy or to control the politics. It has already derailed from the people, so that it's possible for them to cause some problems. So the term modernity make people lots of intellectuals keep talking about the modernity, but I still have to reiterate that in the 80s, 90s, and the new century, all the description, especially in the sense of the institutional of modernity, they are all the poison of neo-colonialism. I know I will receive lots of critics on this aspect. And the another characteristic of the neo-colonialism is in the aspect of economies, such as the market. Is marketing economy good? Yeah, of course. We have already trade. The trade has existed for more than 5,000 years. Is the free competition good? Well, you have to think about market is not isolated. The neo-colonial market is actually the combination of 4 aspects. First, privatization. Is privatization good? Well, it depends. Some things are not to be privatized. If you privatize everything, then well, this is the end. And we know this is a common sense. For example, the army. Can you privatize that? The privatization, after privatization, the second is the marketization. Because when you privatize something, then you can sell it. In China, there are lots of intellectuals and lots of people who come from the 80s, who were born and grow up in the 80s. They kind of adore the privatization and marketization. I once wrote an article to criticize against that. So I'm not talking about morals, but we're talking about the margin. Where is the border of the privatization and the marketization? Can you sell the Tiananmen Square in Cambodia? I'm not talking about I'm not saying that the competition is bad. I'm saying privatization and marketization has borders. So the third is the capitalization, which is the key issue. Because once you started capitalization, there is the alienization. Because if you can privatize anything and you can seek rent on anything, for example, the land, the digitals, if everything can be seeked rent, this is what capitalization means. The over-capitalization, the bottomless capitalization will lead to the disaster of a country and a nation. Is capitalization good? Because yes, it is good, because the industrialization cannot live without capitalization. In certain process of China's economy evolution, China has to put a part of land, especially the residential land, to privatize it. And this caused the super rent, because this can bring the fortune to a part of the population who can earn wealth through the rent seeking. But is there some positive effect from it? There is the logic. There's certain logic to capitalization. If China didn't release some land for capitalization, then China cannot enjoy such a high rate of economic growth. So this is a double blade. The philosophical height is very important. If you didn't see this from the point of view of philosophy and without the depth of history, you are just saying that you are against the land policies, against the residential, against the real estate tax, then it is not correct. There are problems. We need it. We need the property rights. We need the housings to revitalize the property, the capital, so that the capital can have this accumulation and for the economic growth. But there is a border. There is a standard. When I'm criticizing, I'm not talking about morals. I'm always talking about where's the border. If there is no control, then if there's no control, there's no morals. And the fourth side is the globalization. The neoliberalization has these 4 sides. So we have the privatization, marketization, capitalization, and globalization. Is globalization good? Of course it is good. we have to go into the globalization, but we can see lots of countries are suffering from this, and China is also going through a very, very dangerous phase of globalization. I was going to talk about some problems.
Talk about some current economic issues, and then I thought maybe that may bring about trouble to our organizers. So I won't go to great details to specific Chinese economic issues. But what I want to say is that there especially needs to be a margin to internationalization, and it requires a great deal of political wisdom to handle it. For example, the internationalization of the RMB. What is it? How to do it? Why some of our friends want to establish offshore RMB exchange centers in major financial capitals around the world, while the sterling and the USD don't need such kind of thing? Why DPRK and Afghanistan want to issue their serenity bonds in China? Because they understand internationalization is debt and not clearing centers. What is a clearing center? There needs to be financial subsidy. Why do we need this? It requires manipulation of prices. It is bad, but there's a whole set of theories and a group of well-trained scholars and researchers to bound China within this dollarized US colonial system. They don't want you to really go international, but they tell you that this is internationalization. Well, there are 4 types of scholars that I like to mention. One, those in educational institutions, and then those in government, and then those in institutions, and the 4th category, you've seen them all. These 4, oh, well, in China, the case is quite complicated. The first 3 categories are not doing well. They're not in the good position. Those in universities, in schools, in institutions, there should be devoted to research. But because of the particularity of the historic era, these scholars do not want to be solitary. They don't want to be the lone wolf or a failure or not to be heard. So they cannot reach great heights in terms of theory. Philosophy and history are no fun. Economists hired by the government, naturologically, they should provide the government and the people with the right suggestions or advice. But very often, these people have their own limitations and interest orientation due to their the departments they serve, or the part of society that they belong to. As I said, these are quite simple financial issues. A postgraduate would understand this very well. What is currency? Is it serenity bound? Does the international free flow of this internationalization? Why do we need a clearing center? Why there should be clearing centers? All these are very simple issues. I'll talk about the 3 types of scholars. The 3rd type, we don't expect them to love our country or love the people. They are the representatives of capital itself. Well, some of them try to put on pretense and talk about morality and talk about how to live your life, but it is good enough that China is a big country with a big population, and some of very proud people with dignity, they can still serve the good purpose. But apart from this, apart from this modernity thing, if we look at it in the lens I've mentioned, we can understand this better. But what about this progressivity? Some of the discussions on this are not very clear. In the 1980s or 1990s, we say that progressivity are the logical traps that used for enslavement, that are very sweet traps. The shock therapy for the former USSR regions, or some options offered to Japan. Back then, the former USSR territory, the residents of them, they thought these are progressive, and the Japanese thought them are progressive. As for the clearing centers I mentioned, like in no longer than 10 years ago, you can read the news back then and see how people describe those. Sometimes, well, I won't go to great details. Maybe I've already talked too much on this so far. As for anti-Neo-Colonialism struggles, it's about serenity. It's fight for serenity. This serenity consists of two things. First, the national serenity, but it's not fundamental. The second one is people's serenity. This one is on a higher level. National serenity is a tool for class struggle. And when we look at Hong Kong, we understand that the discussion on its return began in 1983, and it finally eventually returned in 1997. Is serenity represented by our national flag, or PLA there, or just diplomacy? Serenity, in essence, is the power to make laws. Does the power to make law belong to PRC, all the people of Hong Kong? Also the power of legislation and administration. Political serenity. Do we have this already? Maybe not. Have we considered how to put in place check and balance? What are the shadow government doing there? How about economic and financial serenity? As for the arrangement of the land in the joint communique between Britain and China, in that, then they designated the Hong Kong dollar as not the status of legal tender, and therefore financial serenity is in that way given to that country. That country was very greedy, and it dared to do something in 2018. Apart from the trade war, it also brought about some very illogical and unreasonable conditions to China. The Federal Reserve back then sent someone there without election or selection, someone as on a managerial post. They've done this with multiple countries, and they want to do this to Hong Kong, to us. And yet we did not give way to the slightest extent. The CPC, our president, and so on and so forth, they did not give way. And all the riots and everything, they've been lasting until this very day. This struggle, this anti-Neo-Colonialism struggle is complex. Decolonialization is difficult. All the issues I've talked about today may seem to you not very close at hand, or that you may have the opportunity to really think about it carefully. But we want real serenity, political serenity, economic serenity. It has a dual meaning. A country's political and economic serenity has a dual meaning. That of the country, that of the people. That is why I talk about multiple times the power to make law, of the people's power to make law. If the people do not have this, then the political serenity is under threat. We cannot always expect there to be a very loyal and wise national leaders, but there are always traitors. Recently, I've talked about highly of two bank leaders of two different countries. One is Lingnan, another is Kuroda Haruhiko. What Lingnan did with the ruble won Russian a war in terms of economics. As for Kuroda, what they did was non-cooperation. The US was printing money like crazy, but Japan says, no, sorry. National debt, national bond is a burden. Well, also, the Japanese yen is also depreciating, whatever. And recently, India decided to use its own currency for trade settlements. We've noticed that in the beginning, a series of countries have begun to say no to dollar capital. The struggle against the neocolonialism is on the rise. And due to some reasons, when we try to understand this world and try to understand our country, we're using some political or sociological or international relations narratives. We cannot say those are wrong per se, but if possible, when these observations lack philosophical depth, we may have a longer way to go. This decolonialization in China involves a lot of issues, and it's difficult. It's a difficult, long upward journey. Well, my representative work was written in 1999, and it's been 23 years, and I've advocated for direct tax for 15 years, and I understand how difficult it is. It cannot even be discussed. The concept itself cannot be discussed. But I have confidence because this is part of the decolonialization issue, and they will eventually win. Well, I will need to speed up a little bit. Maybe I've gone a little bit too far on issues of interest to me. The third part will talk about China's thoughts and China's way out. Of course, China's thinking did not begin with me. Those important historical thinkers, well, there were two of them. One, Mao Zedong, and then another, Deng Xiaoping. Well, both of them, in the two of them, back in the 1960s, when China succeeded with 2 5-year plans, they began to reflect on the system of the USSR. I'll talk about China first. We're a very interesting country in some way. The CPC, since its founding in 1921, they've gone through highs and lows, and they went to inner areas of inner revolutionary basis in 1927, and by that time they began to understand finance and economics and had their own red economics and finance. I've discussed with scholars of military, and we said that if you do not look at the inter-party struggles or military struggles, if you just look at the finance and economics in the red basis, you will understand that the failure of the Red Army was inevitable. Of course, there are multiple reasons due to Wang Ming or the other personnel. But the essence is that their economics and finance cannot support the survival and development of the red basis. There were even some massacres back then, which were related to feeding themselves. The economic fundamentals determines the superstructure. We always have to believe Marx. But when controlling power was back to Mao Zedong, who was very programmatic and practical, he began to think about these problems. Some believe that guerrilla wars in the mountains is a strategy. No, it was determined by economic laws. The two sections of the Red Army established their bases, and the financial and economic policies they used were able to support the base and the military themselves. Mao's handling of these became more or less very mature until the Red Army reached the northern part of Shanxi. There was the winning. The anti-Japanese war, in my opinion, maybe a little bit exaggerated. It's like 90% owing to economics and financial policies. Of course, we have great military leaders, great generals, but they are not the key. There used to be this land reform. If Chairman Mao hadn't been in terms of economics and finance, just our military versus their military will not give us a victory. Why I was talking about history? Because we have been trying out a system that back then cannot be called modern or progressive, but it was useful and effective. In the 1950s, China had been established already, and we began to learn from the USSR and establish the financial and economic system like theirs. By the 1960s, Mao found that it had been problematic. He brought a group of people to Hangzhou to think about this issue, and Liu Shaoqi brought a group of people to Hainan to look into the textbooks, economic textbooks of the USSR. But I think someone who did this the best was Deng Xiaoping. He did that with a group of people back in Jiangxi. Well, this is my own summary, not his own words, because I define the USSR socialism as national capitalism, and I define the US capitalism as financial capitalism. National capitalism and financial capitalism both have their shortcomings and limitations. Mao found the problem, discovered that there was a problem. Or maybe because of insufficient time, he wasn't able to have the very proper, very applicable, the most correct measure to solve the problem.
So what are we opening up to? We open up our capital. We open up to the capitals. And then Deng's thinking is very simple. That the country, such a big country, of course, we have to sometimes have to suffer from the stagnation. We need when there is a scarcity of capital, there's stagnation. So where do we get the capital? We can get it from the social, from the society, the social capital. And we will also introduce the foreign capital so that the state capital can combine with the social capital and the foreign capital. And thus we can have a hybrid type of capital. So Deng Xiaoping find a path, although he doesn't come up with a theoretical generalization, but here we can sum up this path that is successful, that and also overlooked by Soviet Union, because Soviet Union was obsessed with the modernity and advancement. So here we will come up with a philosophical sum up. Again, this is some sorts of in philosophy. We never reject the modernity and advancement, but to a great country, a great nation, a great party, what it needs, it's the subjectivity, adaptivity, and also the because when we don't have, if we don't adapt, if we are just trying to wear some other people's shoes, it doesn't work. And also the third one is the creativity. We need to create a solution. So what we need is three: subjectivity, adaptivity, and also creativity. Although this is my summary, but actually Mao has already come up with this idea in his writings. So this hybrid socialism is very powerful, and that is why China enjoys such an economic growth. Of course it is good, but sometimes the creativity, subjectivity, and also adaptivity also has its own limitations. Because sometimes when we are developing and in this hybrid system, the state capitalism cannot control the social capital or the foreign capital. Thus, we will see a situation that we didn't expect. After all, the Americans' financial capitalism is very strong and has great potential. They have their own way. When it comes to the hybrid capitalism, they can construct some obstacles for us. Although the moderator allowed me to develop on the topics, but I cannot go too far away from the topic. So now let's go to the last part, which is the dawn of a new era. So what is a new era? In order to talk about a new one, we have to talk about the old era, which is the colonial era. The new era is an era without colonization, without colonism. It's the new socialism era. It's an era where people can really become its own owner, its own boss. Confucius has talked about this. He said, an honorable and wise person focuses on cultivating the fundamentals. Once those are established, all causes of action shall emanate from them. So what is the fundamentals? That is the country. Once you set up the fundamentals of the country, then you know where is your way. America, if examined if you examine it, I think the population of America has already become the slave of the capital, the financial capital, in a status that is even worse than the slave labor. Once there is some problem, if we talk about the 1944, the Bretton Woods system as the beginning of the time, because I'm using the concept of the philosopher, the German philosopher Simmel. He was talking about the value of the American US dollar. Now the US dollar has devaluated to 1,840 US dollar for 1 ounce of gold. Back in the 1944, it was 35 US dollar for 1 ounce of gold, which means it has devaluated like from 100% to 1.9%, and this is already a an overestimation. All the systems around the US dollar is actually a Ponzi scheme. Of course, although the capital colonization has already run its course, but normally when it comes to an end, it is a ferocious time. It's a very cruel, brutal time. So this is what we are facing now, a brutal reality. Since it is the financial colonization, in order to fight against it, we have to go back to the capital, go back to the currency, and go back to the fiscal. So what kind of fiscal system that we need, that we have to build so that it will be different from the American one that uses printing machine as their way of get himself out of troubles. So what we need is a high-powered currency. So the high-powered currency means it has to be built on the base of the direct tax reform. The RMB needs to be the bond, the treasury bond of the country's sovereignty, because as a symbol of the debt is what it's supposed to be. From the country will, what we need is like a tax reform that is 60 to 70% from the debt, and that is the best of the currency. Second, the seigniorage should come from the National People's Congress, and its value should come from its own part, the legislative power, which is also from the legislative body, which is the National Congress. And China could offer this power, could offer this future fiat currency for the whole world, because it is based. RMB is based on people's legislation, and it can become a value scale, because the people around the world all look forward to a peaceful and equal environment. It is not right to always have this kind of depreciation and appreciation from time to time. No economy can, or no people can enjoy a prosperity in this kind of environment. This is what we need in the new era. But of course, there are also lots of other points, but this would be the general concepts and what I like to focus on the aspect of the finance and also the fiscal system. Because if I go too far away, I might overlook the topic of today. In 2020, the 20th National Congress, when it comes to 20, actually is always in Chinese history, is always important, including this one. In the 20th National Congress, it's a milestone in the Chinese history, because it will build the sovereignty, the subjectivity for the people and for the nation. And this is where we also gain the philosophical height and started the build of the whole society. And from this, we can go to the whole world. We are not talking about fighting against any country. We don't have this intention. I mentioned days ago in 2016, China and Hong Kong already had a military conflict, and that would be the last time that the US could started a warfare against China, because at that time there was the aircraft carrier in the South China Sea between China and also USA. And since then, China has been producing the aircraft carrier once every year. We have a strong maritime power within the 1,000 miles from the coast of China. We have the relative superiority. And this is in military. And in economics, in 2008, Trump lost its chance. Since it already lost its window in politics and also in economics, USA has to come to terms with what it is facing now. Yellen, the USA, the chair of Americans Fed, it already said that the American supply chain, most of the primary products comes from China, including like medicines. They say, okay, if you don't have to rely on China for food, but still there are lots of products, industrial equipment all come from China. The chain, what is the chain? Supply chain. The chain come from China. The chain has its core, has its center in China. Without the chain, you cannot start a trade war or technologies war or even financial war. America is actually very clear, is aware of this, but China or Chinese people are not seeing it very clearly until the Shanghai lockdown, because once you have the production chain, then you have the supply chain. The supply chain is all resolved around China. The truth is, till today, what determines the destiny of the humans, politics and economics is already left in the hand of China. We don't have to be nervous about the neighbors' militarism or the war between Ukraine and Russia. It is not that important, because as long as we can do what we are doing, this is what the great power about. We just need to focus on the on the philosophical thoughts, focus on our path from the past, to build on our depth of the history, and to look at the situation, look at the status quo from the heights of philosophy. Then you can see clear what is lay before us. Now it's 9:30, so this will be what I would like to this will be my lecture, and I would like to leave some time for Q&A. Thank you. I am too absorbed in your lecture, and in our Chinese in the Chinese website, we have also collected lots of questions. It's about the first question is, in recent years, we have seen that America trying to use its military power to promote that the US dollar is going to anchoring on the for example, the carbon issuing rights. It seems like they are trying to form this kind of three powers, which is between the EU and America and the G7. But at the same time, we can see that Germany seems like trying to give up the power of the issuing. So for China, does it propose, is a challenge, or is more like an opportunity on the issue of because it might be a chance for China to do some transformation. If, for example, that China, if we're anchoring the RMB on the resource in China, especially for example, the natural resources, do you think there's such a chance? So this is about the carbon emissions, the change of the US dollar anchoring on the carbon emissions. This is a good question because a few years back, I had a lecture in Beijing, which is about the US dollar anchoring on carbon emissions. And because at that time there is such a thought that American dollar after the gold US dollar and the capital US dollar, now it should be carbon US dollar, because the high end high end officials, they has already started to prepare for the carbon US dollar, including, like, for example, in China we have lots of forests in China. Actually, the carbon emissions rights in China has already bought off by some of these companies. So, but at that time, nobody had expected that China would enjoy such a high growth of economies. But
in this area, China may have immense potential and technological advantage, and they've already begun to pay close attention and give high priority to carbon emission technologies. But financially, finance-wise, we haven't done much. We've said that our surplus currency reserve should be used to purchase gold, carbon emission rights, and such tools. And they can see that maybe Western countries, especially the US, are slowing down in this regard. The US has a lot of problems in terms of dealing with its carbon and its new energy. This offers us an opportunity. We do not say that you should not say that this is a wrong choice. It's an especially correct one. It gives us new opportunities. Thank you for this question, a very in-depth and very meaningful one. Thank you, Mr. Wu. Here's another question. I believe it may also serve as an extension of your first ever session on Bilibili. this question says that more and more people today are getting indebted, especially housing mortgages. He or she wants to say that if it's possible, can our government prevent the general public, the mass population, to become enslaved to capital, or fall further in this direction? What he or she wants to ask is that how the government, in terms of finance, how can the government handle this? Thank you. Oh. We always can draw some lessons from history when handling the housing issue. Switzerland and Scandinavian countries are good examples for us. Back then, they've also had experience in handling these problems, these kind of problems. This is a problem not just the question asker who faced. This is a problem faced by everyone. The biggest problem is the 290 million migrant workers urbanization. The Gilets jaunes yellow vest movement in France may enlighten us, may warn us in this regard. France wasn't doing a good job in this regard. We're in a very special era. We need to deal with the issue of turning this 190 million migrant workers into urban middle class, which means we should provide them with housing, a car ownership, and social security. Well, in terms of my expertise, this does not cost a lot of money. Building houses does not cost a lot of money. It's just because of the hyping of the land. In the first-tier developed cities, providing housing itself does not provide a lot of money. It is also the same with social security. Once direct tax is established, part of this leverage from this, some of them will be used during a decade time or so to establish an overall very comprehensive security net for the general public, for the whole population in China. Imagine if they can turn this 290 million people into middle class, they will be creating another US in the next decade. Some economists say that it's impossible. This is not because they lack the knowledge, but because they lack the conscience. If we handle this well, if the redistribution of assets is good, we will have great demand and keep the economic development at a rapid pace for 1 or 2 decades without any problem. We can do this without any problem. In this way, we can so-called create another US and will eliminate the indebtedness of housing problems once and for all. This housing mortgage is a kind of free leveraged tax. This is a form of labor that were exercised early. I never believe housing to be a kind of infrastructure construction. It's some kind of financial instrument, financial tools. It's not fair for neither the general public or the country, so it needs to be put to an end. Thank you for your answer. And the next question is, as you mentioned in a later part, like part 4 of your speech, you said that the financial hegemony of the US is declining and will come to an end. This one asks, currently, how is this US financial hegemony capable of threatening China? To what extent? And if China wants to decolonize itself, what are the major areas that they need to work on? Which specific areas that are of great concern where they can work? Well, I think you more or less answered them to Justin. So would you like to add a little bit more? I understand everyone is especially concerned with the US dollar, so maybe I'll add a little bit here. As a credit, USD credit, it is supported by US tax levy tax. Its expansion are like 7 trillion USD, but its tax reaches about 3 trillion. And the most interesting is the US economy is lacking the capability of expanding, of growing. Its tax cannot even cover half of its expansion. Theoretically, this is already making US on the verge of bankruptcy. The level of indebtedness is too in proportion to its solvency capability. So it's on the verge of bankruptcy. So it has 2 choices. One is to have a country like Japan where it can always draw blood from. Another one would be to launch war. Currently, I believe even South Korea, Japan, or Taiwan all want to subject to the first choice. It still cannot feed the US. Only China will be the perfect target, but then China wouldn't do this in any regard. As for the second choice, launch a war, it's too late. It cannot launch a war in the Middle East because it's meaningless. But then the US cannot fight Russia. So it's too late to launch a war. It's just a matter of time, and it won't be too long. So I believe everyone should make preparations for the upcoming major changes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lu. And then here's another question about current issues. Now one of the audience asked, like smaller countries, for example, Sri Lanka, this kind of bankruptcy of a country will this continue to occur. And as for the the risk of inflow into China, and how much is this probability or the possibility? As for, well, I'd like to mention the DPRK. But for the DPRK or for Afghanistan and now for Sri Lanka, we always want to mention that China must have its massive Marshall Plan, not against the current situation. We need to save these countries. Say that Sri Lanka will be a traitor against us is a totally different issue. We have to save these kind of countries. We need to do this. But we need to handle this in a very, very subtle way. Our handling of Afghanistan was quite successful, but not too ideal in my opinion. We should allow Sri Lanka to issue its serenity bonds in Beijing, where the collateral will be its natural resources, its islands, or its ports. And because they're collateralized against the RMB, they will have a new opportunity to revitalize itself and emerge again. It's an opportunity and not a burden. We must see that the process of solving these problems is also a process to digest China's excessive production. It is a way of create extra demand to live up to our extra production. And the key lies with our central bank. We need to handle our central bank. Our central workers in the financial industry are always thinking about offshore clearing centers. No, this is not the point. From a historical or philosophical point of view, this is quite a simple problem. But when we discuss this, it's not easy to persuade some of those people. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Lu. I think so much for the Chinese questions in Chinese. As in our Zoom chat room, we've seen questions being raised in English. We've already translated this question. It's a simple one. Do you think the way America responded to Ukraine war can be seen as an end to its hegemony? I think basically this means that is this an end to its hegemony? It means the hegemony is ending, and that is why the US is doing all these things at all costs. Does it mean it's some kind of struggle before its last breath? Do you also believe this? If so, you can make a little analysis of this. First of all, thank you for this question. Well, this is my take on this issue. In the beginning, I already said that it's a national emancipation war of the Slavic people. Of course, from the Russian or Ukrainian point of view. On the US point of view, on the other hand, well, China is a threat, obviously, but China has never become the #1 threat to the US during the Trump and Biden administration. They always thought that the biggest threat comes from the euro. And it's their sensitivity towards capital itself because they are capital colonists. How to solve this euro threat? The eurozone. We also need to talk about this NATO thing. NATO is against the EU. So once this eurozone merges with Russia, once Russia is integrated into the EU militarily and financially, it will be a very, very big, immense threat. So US strategists should first try to make divide between Russia and the EU. I don't think this is a total failure on the US part this time. In some sense, it has resolved some of its strategic concerns. This confrontation between the EU and Russia makes the euro to depreciate rapidly. It's already 1-to-1 to USD, and this is one of the US goals. But they did not expect that although the euro is crippled, the ruble, on the other hand, appreciated. And it was because it is linked to coupled with gold, and it is also a resource currency. And from a different perspective, it demonstrated how fragile the USD is. So in this battle, the US lose one half and won one half. Or whether it demonstrates that it is a failure of the US hegemony, I cannot say it's totally so, but I'd say it somehow has demonstrated this possibility to some extent. Thank you. Thank you very much. So during this what was little was left for time, I would like to make a summary of what Mr. Lu just then talked about. Well, this evening, in four different parts, Mr. Lu talked about his topic of the end of neocolonialism and the dawn of a new era. The first one is that how to define our current era. He defined this. What era are we in? We need to have a clear idea of this. So he took this from a colonial history perspective. He analyzed the major problem of the current world is that we need to put neocolonialism to an end. Also, post-colonialism, whatever word we want to use. It is a reminder to us that colonialism is not over. We're still facing it, just in a different stage, in a different form. It's different from the past in that there is military occupation, other things like that. Now it's realized through the control of capital. And decolonization, on the other hand, is to shake free of this kind of capital control. And not just economically, there are also cultural or in other sense, we also need to do this. Ms. Lu also pointed out from a Marxist lens that the current neocolonialism is still a kind of class struggle.
So to fight against the colonialism is still a fight of class. So when Mr. Lu has used has already let us, has pointed out very clear that this fight is still in the financial framework. He pointed out earlier that this war was a struggle against neocolonialism. And he also mentioned that the ruble uprising was one of the means of class struggle against the colonization of dollar capital. And the ruble uprising has achieved a considerable success. The article on the ruble uprising was published in our Global University WeChat account. And so there are some reference points that we can learn from, because the ruble uprising is the ruble once again anchoring back to the resource. So now the ruble has become a resource currency, although it has to rely on gold, but at least it has some value. And this is what Mr. Ru was talking about the high-powered currency, because the currency needs an anchor, and it has also a referential point for China. And the second part, when Mr. Ru was talking about how can we fight against the neocolonialism. I find it very interesting because Mr. Lu very vividly uses the analogy of landlords, tenant farmers, and property owners, peasants to describe a classified state relations. On the national level, especially in the global south, the goal of the struggle is to decolonize and to decouple or delink from the Western system, delinked from the American US dollar. which is just like to fight to be a self-sufficient property owner farmer instead of to be a tenant farmers, let alone to work for the landlords. I think this is a very interesting metaphor, and we can use this as a way to analyze the relations between countries, especially in the frame of under the frame of neocolonization. On this part, Mr. Lu also spoke with a great depth. What we are fighting against, when we are fighting against colonialism, what are we exactly fighting against? Modernity, advancement, and so-called development are all the words that given by the neocolonialism, because we call us a developing countries, which also means like the less developed countries, and these are all just terms given by the colonizers, and by pursuing it and worshiping this kind of colonized standards, we are still inside this ideology and development path set by it. I think this is quite similar to Professor Wen's criticism of modernization and his analysis of Western soft power. Later on, Mr. Lu criticized on the privatization, marketization, capitalization, and globalization, which are inherent in the modern systems. This also has something in common with Professor Hudson's criticism of the rent-eating class. The rent eaters or the profit eaters, those people who are covered with lard around their face, relying on this, especially the globalization, which is the one that we should be most vigilant. In the earlier in the Chinese website, there is a comment in the live a live comment from the netizens. He's saying that we should not be globalized. A country should not be globalized to other countries. On the issue of sovereignty, Mr. Lu has talked many times before. In fact, the sovereignty is this problem. The issue of sovereignty is also the origin of the formation of super land rent in Hong Kong. So I welcome everybody to listen to Mr. Lu's super rent lecture series. Some people says that Mr. Lu supports the independence of Hong Kong. So I don't know whether if he supports it or not, but those who say so may not be clear about the difference between the Occupy movement and the independence movement, because the Occupy Central movement is the continuation, is the spread under influence of Occupy Wall Street movement, which is the 99% of population stand up to the 1% who is the financial class. They are trying to say no, because the central in Hong Kong is the financial center of Hong Kong. That is so we can use the framework of Mr. Lu, because this is the class struggle of the 99% of the population against the 1% is a class struggle. So I think the neo-colonialism is can be confusing, because they make the 99% willingly and unwaveringly to speak up for the 1% profit eaters. This is one of the biggest challenge that we are facing. And yesterday I also mentioned something similar, because this 1% of financial class, although there might be a different way to classify this 1%, because they always promised, they said one day you can become me. Some people says like at that time, a few years back, I was able to buy a house with 5% down payment back then, and So hurry up, you can also buy a house with some low down payment, and one day you will be rich just like me, and people buy it. And lots of young people might just sacrifice their life just for this, because people really need to buy it. They think, oh yes, these rich people are just teaching us how to become rich just like them. But if there but this contrast will be always like this, because we are talking about the 1%. The 1% is going to be occupied that 1% forever. And so for us, in order to understand the class struggle, how can we decolonize? Mr. Lu has proposed something very very interesting and important. And we like one day that after we editing, and we will talk with Mr. Lu, see if we can produce a series for the audience. So on the third part, Mr. Lu analyzes the Chinese part, the socialism with Chinese characteristics. In the past, we already have 7 episodes in the Bilibili, which is by Mr. Lu as well. And he already analyzed in detail in that lecture. There's one time he was talking about the Chinese path, and that lecture was 1 hour long, and is also of great importance. The fourth part, the outlook to the future, which Mr. Lu called it as the dawn of the new era. And to begin that dawn, we need the end of the dollar. The new era requires the establishment of a new global credit system. And Mr. Lu has already gave great high expectation to the 20th Congress. And I believe that's all is of great importance and of great expectations. I believe this 20th Congress, National Congress in the 2022, we can all look forward to it. And this would be, I know Mr. Lu started with when we are about to start, we have some problem with the microphone, and Mr. Lu don't want to prolong too much, postpone too much, so he didn't expand too much on the third and the fourth part. So hopefully in future you are all welcome to listen to the lecture in the Chinese website. And there will be always some articles edited out of it, and you can always read them in the website. As we can see that there's a lot of people trying very hard to be able to listen to Mr. Lu's lectures. And now we are also producing a series of lectures of Mr. Lu on the fiscal system. We are going to promote it in the Xiaohui, because it might not be able to come out in the Bilibili. If we can put it out in Weibo, we will also try on that channel. So please keep your eyes, keep one eye out on the notice that we will put out on the websites. Thank you, everyone, and we are looking forward to hearing more from Mr. Lu.